Hello everyone, I'm Alex Dykes. This is a 2014 Nissan Rogue crossover, and this is a Graco 50 Classic Ride child seat. Today we're going to be talking about how well 1, 2, and 3 of these child seats fit in the back of the Nissan Rogue. We'll also be hopping in the back with the child seats to see how well adults and child seats interact in that second row bench seat. And then we'll also be tossing these child seats in the cargo area of the Rogue to see how well they fit back there. If you're looking for the full review of the Nissan Rogue, then go ahead and click that banner at the bottom of your screen. The full review should be up in about 2 or 3 days after this video first launches. So if that link doesn't work at the bottom of your screen now, just check back in a day or two. For 2014, the important thing to know about the Rogue is that it is now available as a 7-passenger crossover vehicle. So in addition to the second row, we now have the option of a third row. Our particular tester here is not equipped with that third row, so this is just the 5-passenger version. But it's really obvious that this vehicle can accommodate that third row, and you can really tell that from this profile right here in the back because the roofline stays very tall as we go rearward. We also have a fairly upright rear hatch glass, and that makes the cargo area an awful lot more practical inside the Rogue, and it also results in improved headroom for the rear passengers. A nice touch on this 2014 model is this rear window glass, which rolls almost completely down. That does seem to make children a little bit happier in the back. Because of the Rogue's tall roofline as well as these large and square doors, it's very easy to get child seats and children in and out of the car because these rear door openings are quite large. The Rogue's second row seats slide forward and backward. This is very much like the Jeep Cherokee. They also recline. That allows you to both square off your cargo area so you can fit more square items in the back, and it also allows you to apportion the space between the second row and the third row if your vehicle is equipped. But it's handier for another reason. Rear seats that slide forward and backward make it a lot easier to install and remove the top tether anchor in child seats. You should always use the top tether anchor where possible because you can slide this car seat forward, and then from the rear door in the car, you can actually attach this top tether anchor right there to the back of the seat back, tighten it up, and then scoot the seat all the way backward in its track. Now you should always pay attention to the user manual both for the vehicle and the child seat, and Nissan does say that the second row should be in the all the way back position when you're using a child seat in the car. So even though it may be tempting to scoot it forwards, that way your child can be closer to you in the front seat, it's safer if they're all the way back in the track. If you've ever wondered why top tether anchors on child seats are so long, the reason is because they can mount to the vehicle in a wide variety of different locations. The Nissan Rogue uses 2 fairly common locations for mounting those top tether anchors. On the outboard seats, they're right here on the back of the rear seat back. Just latch them on like I showed you earlier there. Now the center child seat anchor in the Nissan Rogue is a little bit different, and you'll find it right here in the ceiling behind the second row, and you latch it on right like that. Well, no, I latched that on wrong, so we'll turn it around and latch that on correctly. And then we just pull to tighten right like that. Now, 2 things to know about this. First off, this tether anchor is not in a direct line right behind this middle seat back, so it may result in a child seat that's pulled slightly askew. We're told that that's not really a problem for most child seats as long as the child seat is firmly fixed in place. You should have much less than an inch of travel if you really tug on the child seat to have it firmly in place. The second thing may sound obvious, but just in case you're wondering, if you have a Rogue with a third row, you're not supposed to use the third row if you have this top tether anchor for a center child seat. So you can either have 2 people in that third row, or you can have a center child seat with this top tether anchor engaged, but not both at the same time. It's important to remember these top tether anchors because they really do improve safety, especially in vehicles like this with a sliding second row, because right now this top tether anchor is very rigid, but if I slide this second row back and forget to retighten this top tether anchor, this child seat moves around a great deal more than if it was tight. The Rogue has a generous amount of rear legroom, and that's really obvious in this rearward facing child seat test. This front seat is adjusted for a 6'5" passenger. It's all the way back in its seat in a relatively upright position, which is enabled by the tall ceiling in the Rogue. And as you can see, I have about 2 inches of room between this rear seat back and the rearward facing child seat. That's about the minimum that you want to be safe, because remember, in a rear end type accident, the front seat will move back just a little bit because of the weight of a person in there, and that could interact with the child seat in a negative way. With the seat adjusted for me at about 6 feet tall, I have about 4 inches of room between the seat back and the rearward facing child seat, which is definitely a safe margin. One thing to keep in mind is that if you do put passengers in that third row of the Rogue, you're going to have to move that second row forward just a little bit in order for them to be accommodated relatively comfortably back there in that third row, and that is going to limit your space right here in a rearward facing child seat installation. Even though the Rogue is available as a 7-seat crossover vehicle, much like that Nissan Pathfinder, it's important to keep in mind this is considerably smaller than a Pathfinder, and that's really obvious in the dimensions of this rear bench seat as well as that third row. The Pathfinder has an awful lot of room in that third row. It's one of the best vehicles in its class, and the Rogue is relatively compact back there in the third row. Here in the second row, the size difference is very noticeable in the width of the rear bench seat. Now, the Rogue does have an awful lot of rear seat legroom that is very typical in Nissan vehicles. Nissan tends to have an awful lot of rear legroom all the way across the board, but the bench seat in this Rogue is just a little bit narrow. It's about average for this class, which means that when I'm sitting here next to two child seats in the rear, my head is kind of digging into the side of the pillar in the car because I can't really sit upright in my seat. You can really tell if you take a look at this center child seat that's in the vehicle, it's decently scooted over towards my side of the car. It's not really centered in the middle of the seat. And that's because the armrests in this particular car are very far inboard. So while there is a decent amount of room you can see between the side of this child seat and the window and the door, that would be safer in a crash because the side curtain airbags are going to come down into that space right there. It means that it's not going to be as easy to accommodate three wide child seats across the rear because right down here, lower in the child seat, the door is actually interacting with that child seat. Another thing to keep in mind, if I sit right back in my seat, and if I actually try and scoot my posterior to the middle of this seat, is the buckle and seatbelt arrangement for the middle seat are actually hitting my rear end in kind of an unusual position. And that's because the seat belt for this center child seat or center seat position actually comes out of the bottom seat bolster of the outboard seat. As a result, the center seat's seatbelt anchorage is actually closer to me in this outboard seat than my own buckle arrangement that I would use to buckle myself in this outboard seat. So I'm going to do that now so we can see how that works. The seatbelt buckle is also under the center child seat. That does make it a little bit trickier to get things engaged here. There we go. And we're all seat belted in. This brings me neatly to the 3 across child seat configuration in the Rogue. While this is possible, things are a little bit tight in the Rogue, and these outboard child seats are digging into the door panels by a decent amount. If you do need to fit 3 child seats across the back of a Nissan Rogue, then you may want to look at child seats that are narrower than this Graco Classic Ride 50 child seat. These are somewhat average, but you can find both wider and narrower seats. If you have wider seats, then they're really not going to fit in the back here, and if you have narrower seats, then you should have no problem with 3 across seating. Before we throw child seats in the back, let's talk about cargo holding practicality, because that's an area where Nissan has really excelled lately in their mainstream vehicles. This rear seat back is folded, and as you can see right now, this load floor is flat with this rear seat back, but it has a few other tricks up its sleeve. It's divided into 2 areas right back here, so we can actually lift that in this position to hold bags and other items that may roll around your cargo area, and that will stay in a fixed position. We can also lower this to the bottom of that load floor, and we get a little bit of extra cargo area right there. Same thing goes for this rear compartment. We can lower it to that particular load floor height. We get a little bit of extra cargo room in the back, or we have a compartment right below that you can store items that are about 4 to 5 inches tall or so. This can also be raised in a second position to give you sort of a storage tier going on in the back of your Rogue. So you can put items down here and then put items on top with this load floor right here, so that way they won't squish the items that are below it. There's also an optional tonneau cover available for the Rogue, and it would engage right around this level right here and cover cargo right about here. Opting for that third row bench seat does cause the cargo capacity in the back of the Rogue to drop by a decent amount, especially when they're being used. In our 5-passenger version here, we can easily put these 3 child seats in a very upright position and toss in a decent amount of roller luggage and still be able to close the rear hatch. It's also possible to put these 3 child seats flat and then still put 1 carry-on roller bag in the back beneath the optional tonneau cover. We also have a power tailgate in our particular Rogue model, which does make it a lot easier to open and close that trunk when you have kids in tow. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. Go ahead and click that subscribe banner at the bottom of your screen so you can be updated on all of our latest videos. At the end of this video, there'll be some additional links. You can click on over to reviews of competing vehicles. You can also click on over to the full review of the 2014 Nissan Rogue. It should be up in about a day or so. You can find the Nissan Connect infotainment system, which is the brand new radio and navigation unit that's in this 2014 Rogue. Go ahead and like this video, comment on this video, subscribe to this channel, tell me what you did and did not like about the 2014 Nissan Rogue or about this child seat review in general, and I'll see you next week.